You're listening to Columbia Radio News. It's December 13th. I'm Olivia Reingold.
And I'm Megan Terros. A new city council bill aims to cut greenhouse gas emissions from New York apartment buildings to address climate change. But what does this actually mean for tenants?
We need to make sure that climate policies won't hurt low-income tenants.
A new report finds that 1 in 8 New Yorkers struggles to put food on the table. NYU students say the school's relief programs aren't cutting it.
6 meal swipes isn't going to solve someone's long-term food insecurity needs.
As Amazon prepares its move to Long Island City, the company is launching a Christmas tree delivery service. But will New Yorkers actually use it?
I don't really know what the return policy would be if it showed up and it just didn't look right.
All that and more on Uptown Radio. But first, the news.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Emma Vickers. President Donald Trump took to Twitter this morning to deny claims that he directed his long-term lawyer, Michael Cohen, to break the law. Cohen was sentenced to 3 years in prison yesterday. He pled guilty to campaign finance charges. Trump tweeted that Cohen agreed to the charges to embarrass the president and get a much-reduced prison sentence. Cohen's abandonment of his former employer leaves the Trump presidency further exposed to the investigation into the 2016 campaign. U.S. senators are expected to vote today on a resolution that would call on the government to withdraw assistance from the Saudi-led war in Yemen. The resolution prevents U.S. forces from refueling non-U.S. aircraft on missions in the country. The move will be a strong condemnation of the Saudi government following the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Yemen's civil war has killed 15,000 and left 8 million people at risk of famine. British Prime Minister Theresa May arrived back in Brussels this morning for a meeting with European Council President Donald Tusk to seek further discussion on her Brexit deal. May survived a leadership challenge within her own Conservative Party yesterday, but drew condemnation from the UK Parliament earlier this week after she cancelled a vote on the UK's Brexit deal. Critics allege that she cancelled the vote because she expected it to fail. She hopes today's meeting with Tusk will produce assurances to satisfy sceptical lawmakers. China has detained a second Canadian on charges of harming national security, the Chinese Foreign Minister confirmed today. Michael Spavor, a businessman, joins Michael Kovrig, a former diplomat, in detention. The second arrest marks an escalation of an ongoing diplomatic row that was sparked after Canada detained an executive of Chinese telecoms giant Huawei. Canada announced this morning that it was seeking immediate consular access to the detained men. A woman accused of being a Russian spy by U.S. prosecutors is due to appear in court in Washington, D.C. today. Maria Butina is expected to plead guilty on charges of spying after prosecutors indicated that they had reached a deal. Butina was arrested in July. She is accused of gathering intelligence by infiltrating the National Rifle Association and the Republican Party. Emma Vickers, Columbia Radio News.
Last Tuesday, Congress passed the Farm Bill. The new law protects food stamps, expands conservation programs, and legalizes hemp, the strain of cannabis used to make fabrics, paper, and plastics. Allison Martin is a reporter and co-founder of Cannabis Wire. She joins us to talk about what this emerging industry will look like.
Hi, thank you so much for being here today.
No problem.
So the new Farm Bill allows farmers to legally grow hemp. What does that mean for the farming industry?
You know, what it will do is allow hemp farmers, for example, to have better access to insurance and access to banking, and it will remove a lot of the gray areas that hemp and CBD products have been existing in for the last handful of years.
And how is the farming industry receiving this news? Is this good news to them?
The broader farming community will probably still have a wait-and-see approach. They want to see what kind of regs and rules will come. But the CBD industry, the cannabidiol industry, and the hemp farmers themselves are, for the most part, elated right now. It, as I said, removes a lot of the sort of gray area that they've been operating in, and it gives them access to resources that, you know, farmers of maybe corn, for example, would have.
Could you tell us about the potential uses for hemp? Where would the listener expect to encounter this maybe in their day-to-day lives?
There are, I could go on for days and days on various products. There are hemp seeds, which people just eat and consume on their own. There's hemp milk. We don't really know the number of products and all of the different products that are probably to come.
If farmers are going to start growing hemp, does that mean that they're going to stop growing something else?
I don't think that farmers are going to stop farming one thing to farm hemp necessarily. You'll have some people that will do that, crop converters.
I'm wondering, can you just tell me what that means and what that means for hemp?
crop conversion is basically when somebody is growing, they're currently growing an agricultural product, maybe soybeans or maybe alfalfa, and they decide to convert or switch to farming something else, in this case, perhaps hemp. I think like anything else, it's going to come down to what's growing well, what's earning money, what's, basically putting food on their own table.
According to CNBC, this could be a $20 billion industry by 2022. What states are primed to get a piece of that?
States like Kentucky, Tennessee, these states are really well primed for hemp farming for a few reasons, existing agricultural infrastructure and also climate. But we'll probably see, an influx of hemp farming from coast to coast.
And how does New York fit into all of that? Could New York become a major player in this industry?
I've been saying for a while that New York is quite primed for both hemp farming and very likely cannabis farming in the future. I think that, Governor Cuomo will very likely push for legalization sometime in early 19. I think upstate New York could actually become a bit of an agricultural powerhouse on hemp.
Allison Martin, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks very much for having me.
The New York City Council held a hearing last week for a new bill that would require owners of the city's largest buildings, residential and commercial, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Advocates of the bill say that targeting large buildings will improve the health and well-being of low-income New Yorkers. These residents are often more vulnerable to the effects of greenhouse gases, coastal flooding, and air pollution. Cosette Nunez reports.
Environmental activists, union leaders, and New York City residents rallied in front of the City Council in support of a new local environmental law, holding signs that read "Climate works for all."
What do we want?
If passed, Intro 1253 would require New York City landlords of buildings over 25,000 square feet to cut their greenhouse gas emissions by 40% in 2030 and 80% by 2050. That means using less heat and water. According to the 4th National Climate Assessment, vulnerable lower-income communities and people of color have a harder time preparing and dealing with extreme weather and climate changes. Johnny Rivera is a member of We Act, an environmental group in the city. He says Bill 1253 is a step in the right direction.
Low-income communities of color usually get impacted first and worst. We need to make sure that climate policies won't hurt low-income tenants. That's right.
New York City Council member Costa Constantinidis is the one who introduced the bill.
The New York area will potentially see a sea level rise of 11 feet. That's higher than LeBron James can dunk a basketball. Then we can expect to see large outflows of migrants from our coastal areas.
Greenhouse gases contribute to flooding and air pollution. New York City buildings in general account for over 70% of greenhouse gases. 1 to 4 family homes represent 82% of the city's floor space, but only 19% of emissions. This is Petra Luna. She introduced herself at the hearing as an immigrant mother with 2 children living in Bushwick. She blames her children's asthma and other side effects from their treatments on the air pollution.
Entre muchos otros efectos.
Bushwick, where Luna and her family live, has about twice the level of pollutants than what's considered acceptable nationally. That report also found that 30% of Bushwick residents live below the federal poverty line and has the second highest unemployment rate in Brooklyn. Just north of the city, in the Bronx, the air quality is even worse. Lorraine Pierre Destine works as a nurse. She says she's treated several children, some just days old, who come into the emergency room wheezing. But it doesn't end there.
It carries on to adulthood. It's usually multi-generational, strong family histories of asthma, and a lot of it has to do with the air that they're breathing.
Pierre Destine says communities need to urge local officials to take climate change seriously. Other advocates for climate equality, like Sarmishta Govindan, hope that when the time for change comes, marginalized communities will be the first to see remediation.
It's really important that we think of climate change not as a natural phenomenon, but as something that humans actively contribute to.
For Govinhan, what's clear is that right now, the responsibility to act on climate change is being disproportionately put on the communities and people who are experiencing the change. Cosette Nunez, Columbia Radio News.
If you live in New York, you probably know by now, Amazon is coming to Queens. Locals are concerned about how the online retail giant will affect their commutes, rents, and favorite shops.
But as Champ Barton reports, there's another concern involving the environmental toll of Amazon's delivery trucks and the company's quiet announcement of a new Staten Island warehouse.
HQ2 is coming, but last Monday I visited another Amazon facility for a chance to catch this. Trucks. Big trucks. The kind that roar and rumble and spew invisible pollutants into the air. This is Amazon's newest fulfillment center in Staten Island. The company announced its construction just a day before announcing their search for a new headquarters, and the facility has gotten little press since. Today, its sprawling cement campus employs around 2,500 local residents, and by the looks of it, nearly as many trucks. Here at minute 25, we have our 5th truck. This can be a problem for local communities, according to Columbia University professor of urban planning, Mallow Hudson.
Imagine a number of those trucks are waiting in line to be loaded up with whatever the goods they're going to carry somewhere else. All that smoke is going into the air. It's really a challenge for vulnerable populations, young or elderly folks, or people with respiratory illnesses or challenges.
He says this problem gets especially bad around the holidays, when people order rush shipping on presents. Those packages are often delivered in separate vehicles. For Amazon's trucks here today, that means many more trips to the company's sorting station just up the turnpike in New Jersey. But for the New Jersey town of Elisabeth, directly across the river, it could mean the return of a nasty problem. Back in 2013, Elisabeth was being used by tractor-trailers and other large trucks to evade a toll along the New Jersey Turnpike. Rutgers University researcher Robert Lumbach, who studied the phenomenon, remembers it clearly.
In the morning, like from 7:50 to 8:50, so there were 57 trucks.
57 trucks in 1 hour?
Right.
That's almost a truck a minute. He counted the number of trucks along First Street in Elisabeth and measured air quality as they passed. Elisabeth community activist Jonathan Phillips helped Lumbach with the study. During a walk along First Street, he pointed out the myriad ways he says the trucks threaten daily life in Elisabeth.
So during the summer, you have kids in a water park and huge trucks coming by spewing that pollution.
Lumbach's study revealed pollution levels so high the city banned tractor-trailers from its streets. But delivery trucks, the kind with 6 wheels instead of 18, are not banned. As a result, Elisabeth streets could again be flooded with heavy trucks, this time from Amazon.
We're building a country, and we're still in that mindset. We're building it for transportation vehicles, not for people.
Seattle resident Isabel Gibson Penrose says she's noticed similar problems back home. She lives 20 minutes from Amazon's Seattle fulfillment center, and the company operates a storage locker in her apartment building. But despite being upset with Amazon for polluting, Gibson Penrose doesn't think customers should stop using the service. She says the onus instead should be put on corporations to change, not consumers.
I know it's really hypocritical of me to take advantage of the convenience and also complain about it, but you can get medicine delivered to your apartment in 2 hours. It's so convenient.
When asked about plans to mitigate pollution from its trucks, Amazon did not respond to a request for comment. Meanwhile, Elisabeth and Staten Island will have to wait to see what effects the trucks have on their air. Champ Barton, Columbia Radio News.
Speaking of the Amazon effect, you might have a 7-foot-tall box being delivered to a neighbor. For the first time, the online marketplace is selling real, full-sized Christmas trees. Amazon rolled out the new product in early November.
New Yorkers are split in their opinions about the new headquarters, or HQ2. And as Caroline Hopkin reports, those opinions may play into their holiday purchases, trees included.
For $199.99, you could order a 6 to 7 foot Christmas tree off Amazon this year. The trees arrive in iconic brown boxes the same way Amazon delivers, well, everything. But New Yorkers aren't jumping online to one-click order their trees just yet. 29-year-old Queens resident Seth Pollack would rather shop at a local vendor.
I didn't think that it was possible to put out of business the guys at the stand down the block from it, but no, they're going to try it.
They being Amazon. Pollack has a lot of concerns about the company coming to Queens. Driving up rent, luring tax money he thinks should go to higher education. So many concerns, in fact, that he joined a group of protesters on Wall Street.
Amazon has got to go! Hey, hey!
People do start to realize now that our purchases are political, and I've certainly seen people I know try and get the word out about a boycott, try and discourage people from buying from Amazon when local vendors are here and need our business.
Meanwhile, about 50 blocks north, local tree sellers at NYC Trees unload a new shipment of Fraser firs. They're lining up the trees in height order. Pine needles are everywhere, and so is that unmistakable smell of Christmas. NYC Trees owner Harold De Lucia says you can't ship a Christmas tree the same way you would ship a box of, say, paper towels.
Amazon is shipping a 6-foot tree in a box and having people set it up themselves. And people don't know that when they get the tree, they have to cut the bottom of the tree off so the tree opens its pores so it can drink water and stay fresh.
The best way to ensure freshness? Pick out the tree in person.
I like the experience of going to get it, and that's something that the internet's never going to be able to offer.
Even those like Aaron Hanratty, who do support the HQ2 deal, agree.
HQ2 being in Long Island City, I think it's going to bring a lot of jobs to New York. At the same time, I don't want the world to turn into a place where everything's bought from Amazon.
Hanratty shops on Amazon a lot, but says she draws the line at Christmas trees. She also has questions about buying a tree online.
There are, frankly, Christmas trees that look bad. So I don't really know what the return policy would be if you ordered one online and then it showed up and it just didn't look right.
The product description says the trees are covered by Amazon's standard return policy. During the holidays, the site says that means full refunds until January 31st. But Amazon didn't respond to a request for comment about whether the extended return policy applies to the not-so-fresh 2-month-old trees. So, while New Yorkers are free to forgo the Amazon Christmas trees in a box this year, there's one thing getting delivered to their doorsteps regardless: the new Long Island City headquarters. Caroline Hopkins, Columbia Radio News.
There's one Christmas tree in New York that can't be ordered on Amazon. It's almost 75 feet tall, and nearly 50 million viewers are expected to gather around it this holiday season.
We're talking about the tree at Rockefeller Center, but not everyone there is feeling the Christmas spirit. As Martin Rather reports, at nearby offices, regular New Yorkers are trying to get their work done despite the crowds.
So good, so good. I love the tree.
Mohammed Abdul is happy because of the increased business for his hot dog cart. Customers are lined up down 49th Street as they look at peanut vendors and hawkers of tchotchkes and baubles. The merchants do well in December thanks to the mammoth Rockefeller Center Christmas tree looming over them. But upstairs inside the 30 Rock building, it's a different story.
I feel that I should like it in theory, but actually it makes all of our jobs a nightmare, and I wish we didn't have it.
Matt Alexander works for NBC on the 4th floor of 30 Rock. He dreads coming to work in December. He says that the tree makes getting to work and grabbing his lunch much more difficult. And how long have you been working here in this building?
About 5 years, 5 long, hard years at Christmas time.
Down the hall, Sam Henneberry also works for NBC. He was promoted to production assistant for a primetime show after being an NBC page. These pages are given some of the more menial jobs in the building. Henneberry was tasked with responding to the questions from tourists who come and visit the tree.
It is a zoo. Like, there are people left and right, and all of them are either saying tree or bathroom or top of the rock, and you are just like, you're just like Spitfire, like there, that is this way.
Now that Henneberry works upstairs, somewhat removed from the needs of the ground floor crowd, he has a new perspective.
I feel like I like the tree, I hate the tourists.
Even some who don't work in the building have issues with tourists. The Metropolitan Transit Authority says that it changed its route skipping the 50th Street bus stops at both 5th and 6th Avenues. This inconveniences an estimated 85,000 daily riders. Car users aren't immune either. Both 49th and 50th Streets are closed to any through traffic while the tree is up. But the tourists are still enjoying themselves.
Zachary Lindelof from Dickinson, Texas.
Like many of the tree's onlookers, Lindelof came to New York for a holiday trip. He loves the tree not for its size, but for the people it brings together.
Like, I feel like I'm at home, but I'm not. It's just so many people here, so many people gathered together, and it's so great that everyone can join together on this holiday season. It's amazing.
Henneberry, working in the building every day, doesn't see it this way.
But I do think that the tourists are kind of abysmal.
The Rockefeller Center Christmas tree stays up until January 7th. Martin Rather, Columbia Radio News.
Right around the corner from that famous tree, you'll find another New York City icon. Fao Schwartz has reopened in a new location, 30 Rock. The store had been a Fifth Avenue fixture since 1870, but 3 years ago it closed due to rent increases.
Rent prices in Midtown have continued to climb, but Fao Schwartz is confident it's here to stay for good. Bianca Giacobone reports.
When Fao Schwartz closed its doors back in 2015, many feared it was the end of an era. At the time, Fao Schwartz was owned by toy giants Toys R Us, which sold it to 360 Group in 2016, just before going bankrupt and closing its almost 800 locations across the U.S. After 3 years, the new owner has brought it back. David Kahn, CEO of 360 Brands, at the ribbon-cutting ceremony.
Today we're making history. Fao Schwartz is back in New York City.
On any given day, people line up outside the store, like this father who came from Los Angeles with his family to enjoy New York Christmas spirit.
We're standing here for the first time for the kids to see the toy store, where I came when I was a kid.
Are you excited that they opened again?
Yeah, I actually am, yes.
Do you have any idea what you're going to buy today?
Don't know yet, but it sounds like they want a little bit of everything here. Legos, stuffed animals, you name it, they want it. So that's all they kept talking about is the toy store. So.
Better than Toys R Us. But Toys R Us historic liquidation has shown that the current economic landscape isn't friendly to brick-and-mortar shops, especially if they're specializing in toys. Toys are still being sold, but it's the giant retailers like Amazon, Walmart, or Target that have most control of the market. So how does Fao Schwartz plan to compete against them, all while navigating Manhattan's ruthless real estate prices? It will all be about the location and the experience. The new location is less than half the size than it was before, and it is just a few steps away from Rockefeller's glittering Christmas tree. In actor David Burka's words,
so this is great. I mean, you can go see the tree, you can go buy your toys, ice skating. I mean, it's like one-stop shopping for New York tourism.
As for the experience, there will be plenty. David Nigley, Chief of Merchandising.
It's full of all those toys that you love, plus new toys, new experiences. You can adopt a baby doll, you can make your own RC car, Clock Tower's back, the Dance on Piano's back, and a lot of new surprises also.
According to global toy expert Richard Gottlieb, it will be the offering of unique products rather than the experience that will sway customers to spend money. Fao Schwartz has to offer products people cannot buy online, and for that, going back to the company's German origins might help.
When you go to Germany and France, and maybe Italy too, a toy purchase is an investment purchase. It's planned, it's a planned purchase, and the purchaser is willing to pay more. In the United States, we buy a lot of plastic. It's not a planned purchase. It tends to be an impulse purchase. I call those landfill toys, and a landfill is another word for a trash dump. So they end up in the trash pretty quickly.
In the meantime, even with the fierce competition and tough economic landscape, shoppers crowd Fao Schwartz and enjoy the experience, while children run around and stumble on the giant singing piano where Tom Hanks once danced in the movie Big. Bianca Giacobone, Columbia Radio News.
The Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York has a new exhibition, a collection of Native American art. What's new isn't the collection itself, but instead where it's displayed.
For the first time, Native American work is displayed in the Met's American wing. As Emma Vickers finds, the decision has raised eyebrows and questions.
The exhibition opened last month, and the 116 pieces on display in Art of Native America were produced by Indigenous communities from across the country. There's a pearl-white waterproof coat stitched together from seal intestine, a shaman's rattle, pottery and paintings. The pieces were produced during a period of mass migration and violence in America, the 1700s onwards, and it's a history that for many is still not reconciled. Not everyone agrees that the items on display should be there at all. Brooke Johnson is a curator at a very different museum, an Indigenous one for the Chugach people in southern Alaska. It's remote and surrounded by mountains and only accessible by water, so we spoke by phone.
at our small cultural center and museum, we actually don't have many of our historic items anymore.
She says perhaps that's because a lot of items were looted from gravesites, and these items finally ended up in the hands of collectors. Like a striking mask. It's a foot tall with simple diagonal lines for eyes and a mouth, and an ochre stripe down the middle. And, as Johnson describes it,
kind of a grumpy face.
The US government tried to assimilate Native Americans and ban traditional crafts. Carving, weaving, sewing skins, all of these were forbidden. These policies continued until the 1970s.
So all of these cultural items mean so much to us because we're actively trying to bring back these cultural aspects of ourselves.
An administrator for the Chugach community said they would ask to have the mask returned, if they could. But the mask is on loan from a private collection. This means it's out of the reach of laws that govern federally funded collections and that can require native art to be given back. So how can museums make sure that it's okay to display these items? Elisabeth Hutchinson is an art history scholar at Barnard.
The most important aspect for contemporary display is collaboration or perhaps even seeding a great deal of input to the source communities.
She says showing America's turbulent history is one of the exhibition's strengths.
To show an America that is complicated makes a lot of sense.
There's a painting in the collection that shows that complexity. It depicts the Battle of Little Bighorn, when the United States Army was routed by a native force. There are plenty of paintings of this by Caucasian artists, but they mostly feature dying US soldiers. This one is by native artist Standing Bear and shows a more even-handed view. And there are as many Native Americans on the canvas as US soldiers. A new perspective is what the exhibition's curator, Sylvia Yount, hoped to achieve.
And presenting a very different perspective on what happened that day, I think is just rather extraordinary. And it's a work that I look at a couple times a week and I see different things in it every time.
Yount acknowledges that not everybody is happy about the exhibition.
And I think there are differences of opinions, clearly, about whether all this material should go back to its source, whether some of it does belong other places where it can be better cared for, where the material can be understood, and that helps in the education of the larger population.
She says the Met is consulting with communities, and the museum is happy with where these consultations are at. And it's an ongoing process. The exhibition is on until October 2019. Emma Vickers, Columbia Radio News.
Have you ever heard Nahuatl or Quechua? They're just two of the hundreds of indigenous languages spoken in Latin America. Over the last decade, New York City has seen an influx of these indigenous language speakers. The city is working to provide general translation services for everything, from a visit to the doctor to legal advice. But the process is slow. As Megan Terrace reports, local groups are taking matters into their own hands.
It was about 7 years ago when Juan Aguirre, director of the Mexican cultural preservation group Mano a Mano, got a call from a nun at a shelter in the Bronx. There was a man there from Mexico who was desperately trying to go back home, but no one could understand him. He didn't speak Spanish.
So when the city, thinks about Mexicans, the first thought is Spanish. We have received many calls since 2010, and you cannot imagine the things that people have said to us. And when I ask them where are they from, they say, oh, they're Mexican. I'm like, no, but where exactly from Mexico they come from? They couldn't answer that.
It turned out the man at the shelter spoke a language used by about only 50 people in the world. It's languages like these that are at risk of disappearing in the next 100 years, partly because there are so few written records. Odi Gonzalez teaches Quechua at NYU. This year, he released a Quechua dictionary with 2 of his students, but he says that having a dictionary is not enough to preserve a language. It needs to be spoken.
We cannot know how many people speak Quechua in New York, for example. Among other reasons, because many people who can speak Quechua, they say not.
According to language preservation groups, many indigenous immigrants are fleeing racialized violence, and they don't want to identify as indigenous. And if indigenous communities don't communicate their language needs, it only makes it harder for the city to step in and help. When they do interact with the city, the respective department will call local cultural groups seeking interpreters. The city wants to create information pamphlets in native languages, but many indigenous immigrants can't read. And even if they did, outreach efforts may not help everyone. The city did not respond in time for broadcast.
I mean, Mexico has 68 different language groups and 364 variants. So that's a lot of languages.
Every Monday night, tucked away on the 8th floor of a building overlooking Union Square, Elva Ambia teaches a Quechua class. She starts by reviewing words for parts of the body with her students.
For me, it's kind of personal because I just love this language. That's all it is for me. I love it, and I want to preserve it. I don't want the Quechua language to die.
Ambia says the fight for equal access goes beyond pamphlets and translation services. It's about saving a part of herself and her culture.
I always say that keeping your language alive is keeping your own self, your own culture alive. If you don't have a culture, you lose part of you. And I don't want that to happen to us.
Ambia says she will continue to add more Quechua classes in the future. Megan Terros, Columbia Radio News. There's more to come. Stay with us. You're listening to Columbia Radio News. I'm Megan Terros.
And I'm Olivia Reingold. Coming up, we have a report on a bill that would expand access to opioid addiction treatments like methadone for New York's prison inmates.
Thanks for talking to us today.
You're very welcome.
Were you surprised that Kavanaugh did not vote to hear the cases?
No, not at all. There was none of the traditional reasons that the U.S. Supreme Court decides to hear a case. The case is not about abortion. The case was about a technical interpretation of the federal Medicaid statute.
Well, can you explain to our listeners the relationship between Medicaid and Planned Parenthood?
Planned Parenthood throughout the nation is by far the largest, and in some states the only healthcare provider who provides basic healthcare and gynecological care services to low-income women who are on Medicaid.
So the Planned Parenthood in Nashville just suspended abortion services, and earlier this year, lawmakers in Tennessee voted to block state Medicaid funding to Planned Parenthood. Is there a direct link between those events?
Yes, definitely. If Planned Parenthood is not eligible to receive Medicaid payments, it cannot afford to provide free, uncompensated health care to low-income women.
So I want to move to some state-specific legislation. As far as Ohio's Artbeat bill, what are lawmakers trying to accomplish with a bill like this?
They're hoping to create a case that will go up to the U.S. Supreme Court to challenge Roe versus Wade. They all obviously know that under current law, a bill like that is blatantly unconstitutional.
So is that the same goal for banning things like dilation and evacuation procedures?
Yes, but there may be an additional goal in trying to make abortions past the very first few weeks of pregnancy difficult, if not impossible, to obtain. Bills banning a certain method of performing an abortion are, yes, intended to raise a challenge to Roe, but they're also intended to make any abortion past, maybe the first 8 to 10 weeks or so of pregnancy difficult, if not impossible, to obtain.
What is the likelihood that state laws will make it to the Supreme Court in the new year?
I don't think that it's likely that the Supreme Court is going to want to take up an abortion case in the near future. I don't see any great appetite in the Supreme Court, in other words, for wading its way right into the middle of a huge institutional and political crisis.
Lucinda Finley, thanks so much for talking with us today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for speaking with me.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Martin Rather. A fire in Queens this morning injured 7 firefighters. The blaze began around 2 a.m. in a restaurant on Queens Boulevard in Sunnyside. Firefighters said that the fire quickly spread to 6 neighboring businesses. All 7 firefighters hurt are in non-life-threatening condition at a local hospital. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio apologized on behalf of all New Yorkers for how the NYPD treated a mother asking for child care vouchers for her 1-year-old son. Jasmine Headley had her child ripped from her arms after arguing with the NYPD at the Human Resources Administration in Brooklyn last Friday. The incident, captured on video, led to protests at City Hall from citizens concerned about the NYPD's aggression towards a young mother, as well as the mayor's perceived inaction. He waited 5 days to apologize, doing so yesterday at a news conference in Bushwick. Amazon is not apologizing, despite many New Yorkers' angry protests. At a city council hearing yesterday afternoon, Amazon executives defended their decision to accept up to $3 billion in state and city incentives to move the company's second headquarters to Long Island City. Opponents of the deal outnumbered supporters at the hearing, both on the city council and in the crowd. Final approval lies with an unelected state commission. A travel advisory is in effect due to the inch of snow expected to hit the city this afternoon. New York City's Office of Emergency Management declared the advisory this morning. That office is still reeling from a November snowstorm that gridlocked the city with 5 inches of snow. With this travel advisory, New Yorkers are being asked to use mass transit wherever possible. But stand clear of the closing tunnel, please. Governor Cuomo will tour the L Train's Canarsie Tunnel just after midnight tonight. The MTA promises that it will do its best to limit the impact of the governor's visit. He'll take a look at the lasting damage caused by Hurricane Sandy in 2012. Expect limited service overnight on the L Train as the MTA takes, quote, emergency control of the subway line. Martin Rather, Columbia Radio News.
Playoffs for digital card game Hearthstone kick off next month. The best players from around the world will compete. But Hearthstone, like most of the esports industry, is still a boys' club. Since the game started, the top male player has earned 13 times more in prize money than the top woman.
And there are other challenges to being a female player, like harassment and a lack of sponsorships. As a warning, this story involves language that might not be appropriate for young listeners. Carrie Monahan reports.
Hearthstone has over 100 million players around the world. That's more than 12 times the population of New York City. But at today's tournament, Jessica Lugo is the only woman competing.
There's still like that girls have cooties mentality. The community can be a little harsh at times.
A gamer for more than 3 decades, she says she's dealt with her fair share of online harassment.
I've been cursed out in many different languages, and when people lose, they find reasons to blame you for your loss. Sometimes it's gender-based.
In an office space on Lower Fifth Avenue, she's surrounded by 48 men. They're seated before laptops and iPads, excitedly waiting for the tournament to start.
Okay, we'll start the tournament in just a few minutes, guys. We're just going to finish compiling the bracket, and then I'll let you know when the tournament begins.
Unlike Fortnite or World of Warcraft, Hearthstone players don't use microphones to communicate. Since Lugo's opponents never hear her voice, they don't know that she's a woman.
People who speak in a certain high register, you're either 7 years old or you're a woman, and neither of those people are welcome in a lot of those environments.
Lugo says she sees harassment of female players on Twitch, the gamer's version of YouTube.
I think women have a lot more to consider when they enter that sphere. Because I've seen guys roll out of beds that they don't bother making that are on the screen behind them, not brush their hair, and start streaming. Woman does that, comments about her cleavage.
Comments on a popular female streamer's channel include, "This chick is such a damn snack. Please do porn," and "I would drink a gallon of this chick's bathwater." This sort of language can be discouraging, but Lugo says there's one woman who's broken the glass ceiling, Rumi Wang, better known as Hafu.
Hey guys, Hafu here, and today I have a card reveal for you. Really excited.
Wang is one of the top female Hearthstone players, with over 500,000 Twitch subscribers. But this kind of success is rare for women. Will Parton is with Power Play NYC, an esports consulting agency.
There are significant institutional barriers to participation. Harassment is endemic, and so that can make participation in these spaces rather unappealing.
Beyond pay disparity and online harassment, Parton says women don't get the same kinds of sponsorships as men do.
You know, it's a self-reinforcing logic, because if you assume that, well, the majority of the esports audience is male and you're a brand and you're trying to target men, you're going to bring your products that you're trying to associate with men in.
Major Twitch sponsors are Monster Energy, Red Bull, Gillette, and the site reports that 85% of its users are male. Even so, there's a widespread misconception that female streamers have a leg up.
There's this really kind of nasty ongoing narrative that it's easier to be a Twitch streamer if you're a girl because all of these horny boys watching Twitch are going to go rush to your stream. The data does not bear this out.
Women make up 5% of Twitch's top 100 streamers. So how did Jessica Lugo fare today? Well, she lost out on the first round, but she's not too worried about it.
I didn't come to win. I'm here very casually, but I had a good time.
Carrie Monahan, Columbia Radio News.
December 1st marked the 30th World AIDS Day.
And while the disease is better understood than it was 30 years ago, reporter Nusmila Lohani found that New York's South Asian community still faces challenges getting the word out.
There are all sorts of new medicine that help HIV-positive individuals lead close to normal lives, such as Biktarvy and Genvoya. But some members of New York City's South Asian community are afraid to seek treatment.
Most of the people, they don't want to come out, and they don't want to recognize themselves that they are HIV positive.
Shefali Roshan says nothing much has changed for the nearly 2 decades she worked as an AIDS case worker in Apija Community Health Center in Manhattan.
Do people talk more openly about HIV positive and testing now?
No, not in South Asian community.
No?
Still no.
If people are not talking about it, how do people get treatment?
Actually, people is not talking about, but when most of the South Asian, when they are very sick, they will try to find out.
Stigma is so strong that Roshan faces backlash herself.
Yes, I used to work, started as a outreach worker, then I distribute the flyer on the street, and then that flyer was talking about the HIV AIDS. So when I try to give them this is the flyer I want to give you because you can come and we can test you. They don't like it, and most of them is throw on my face the paper, and they also think I am the person also HIV positive. So that's why I am working in this field.
When case workers are treated this way, living with the virus can pose severe challenges. Kabir Smith is in his mid-50s. His wife and kids are back in India. But that's not his real name. Because he's HIV positive, he would rather use a pseudonym. As he eats a pastry in a Manhattan cafe, he still calls the virus the problem, even after 17 years of diagnosis. But he says he was lucky.
The reason I'm alive and well is because of early testing and treatment.
World Health Organization reported that early testing and treatment is key in saving lives and allowing people to lead normal lives. But outreach work can be difficult. Because the history of AIDS narrative often does not include people of color or the immigrant community. Kyle Croft works with Visual AIDS, an arts organization fighting against AIDS stigma.
There's been a lot of reflection at Visual AIDS about the whitewashing of AIDS narratives and the way in which histories of the AIDS epidemic are also often told in a way that focuses on white gay men.
Angels in America Broadway and Dallas Buyers Club movies speak to this point. AIDS case worker Roshan is working with her organization on campaigns to reach out to local mosques and community leaders. In the following month, they will hold seminars with mosques to this effect. Nusmila Lohani, Columbia Radio News.
8 in 10 inmates in New York's prisons and jails say they need help for substance abuse. That's according to the state's Department of Correctional Services. But almost all of them can't access what scientists agree is the most effective way to treat opioid addiction. Olivia Reingold reports on the effort to change that with a state bill.
1 year. That's how long Democrats in the state assembly have been sitting on the same bill. It would expand what options inmates have to treat opioid addiction. But its time might be coming. Democrats will take full control of the legislature next session, and when they do, it'll get reintroduced.
Hey.
Still, even if the bill passes, Laura Levine says it'll be 5 years too late. She went to Nassau County Jail for petty theft in 2013, and it didn't take long for her to start going through opioid withdrawal.
You know, just the continual vomiting. You have snot pouring out of your nose. Anything you put in your mouth comes right out.
There are medications she could have taken. Methadone and Suboxone can be used for detoxification and long-term recovery. But Levine says the doctor gave her Pepto-Bismol. She took him up on it, but eventually when she got out of jail, a judge ordered her to get outpatient treatment. And she did what her substance abuse counselor told her not to do. She got on methadone.
And it was the best decision that I've made, and honestly, it's kept me clean since then.
Methadone and Suboxone are considered the gold standard for treating opioid addiction. But they're also controversial since they contain opioids.
Oh, yeah, I got it.
Levine now works as a health educator at Vocal NY, an organization that advocates for low-income New Yorkers. She hands out clean syringes at the needle exchange. Upstairs, Jasmine Budnella is getting out of a meeting.
The 2016 dash.
She directs public policy at Vocal NY.
Oh, hi.
According to a study co-authored by the New York State Sheriff's Association, 2/3 of correctional facilities in the state offer medication-assisted treatment. But for almost all, that means a shot of Vivitrol. It's the only FDA-approved medication for treating opioid addiction, that doesn't have opioids in it.
I would say that people in corrections would rather use Vivitrol. And the reason why is because it's faster. You give somebody a shot once versus giving wraparound compassionate care.
What she's talking about is Vivitrol's reputation as being low maintenance. It only comes in one dose. Methadone and Suboxone require follow-up appointments, check-ins to see if the dose is right. But she says that's worth it because recovering users prefer those medications.
As for folks who say Vivitrol is my fave, I would say I've never heard that here. Yeah, it's not a thing.
Peter Kehoe disagrees. He's the head of the New York State Sheriff's Association. He says inmates are excited about Vivitrol, and that works for him because he has concerns about the opioid-based alternatives.
There's a philosophical, I think, objection to methadone and any of the opioids.
So it worries him that the bill would put methadone and Suboxone in every correctional facility in the state. But he has practical concerns, too. Ones he says don't apply to the massive facilities in New York City.
They have large staff, large budget, large programs. Those things are not feasible in a jail that's got 3 inmates or 20 inmates.
That's why he plans to meet with the Democrats behind the proposed legislation once the new session starts. Olivia Reingold, Columbia Radio News. A new report from the nonprofit group Hunger Free America found that about 1 in 8 New Yorkers doesn't have a reliable source of food.
And it's not just a problem in low-income neighborhoods. It's also happening at some of the nation's most expensive private colleges. Ali Swenson reports.
In the bustling marketplace at one of New York University's Greenwich Village cafeterias, a meal swipe is a golden ticket. It lands you access to everything from crispy French fries to kielbasa and potato hash. But Junior Victor Markov doesn't have a meal plan, so he stands outside the dining hall waiting for someone to enter.
And I'll basically ambush them, and I'll be like, "Hi, can you swipe me in for a meal swipe?" And usually they'll say yes.
When Markov doesn't do this, he says, he sometimes can't afford to eat at all. He's been paying for school, housing, and food on his own for 1.5 years, since the summer he came out to his family as a trans man and they stopped supporting him. Recently, he says, he spent 3 days relying on snack bars as his primary meal.
You try to do your schoolwork, you try to go to work, and all that your brain is saying is food, 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 food.
Markov isn't the only student who knows that feeling. When NYU surveyed 1/3 of its campus last year, about 1 in 5 respondents said they struggled to afford food. Applied to the entire student body, that's about 8,000 students. And the problem isn't just at NYU.
I think there has been an increase in food insecurity among college students.
Nick Freudenberg is a public health professor at City University of New York. He says more low-income and minority students are going to college these days, and that's a success story, but not when universities aren't providing the necessary support.
For a long time, universities have felt their only job was to educate students, not to address the living conditions, and particularly the living conditions of the new demographic of collegians that need some help.
Some local private colleges, like the New School and Adelphi University, have food pantries, closets stocked with non-perishable goods so no student goes hungry. NYU explored and rejected that idea 2 years ago, citing lack of space and finances, but the school established other programs. I'm here for Elisabeth Kuzina. Hi. Elisabeth Kuzina is with NYU Student Affairs.
We have been trying to connect students with a number of programs like meal swipe sharing, peer-to-peer networks like that. We also have a short-term assistance program.
That program supplies students with 6 meal swipes, no questions asked. But Kuzina says only about 2% of students used the service this semester. She says although the school sends out emails and hangs posters, it's still hard to get the word out.
We've heard from students who said, I saw the email and my RA told me about it. And then we've also heard from students who said, wow, you should have advertised this.
And what does food insecure student Victor Markov have to say about the program?
Don't get me wrong, it's useful, it's great that those options exist, but 6 meal swipes isn't going to solve someone's long-term food insecurity needs.
Food pantries are one potential fix, but Freudenberg says they don't solve the root of the problem.
Food pantries are an important first line of defense, but it's really a Band-Aid. The underlying causes of food insecurity are not having enough income to support themselves, and that requires looking at other issues: housing unaffordability, the high cost of tuition, and the high cost of food.
NYU says it's working on longer-term food insecurity support, but it's difficult to find one solution to fit all student needs. Meanwhile, Freudenberg says for lasting solutions, students might need to go beyond campus, to the polls next election. Allie Swenson, Columbia Radio News.
Eggnog, hot apple cider, hot chocolate. These are staples of the holiday season.
But in Southeast Asia, people like to consume durian, an expensive fruit known for its divisive smell and taste. This winter, a surplus of durian in Malaysia is causing vendors in New York City to slash prices. Shannon Lin reports.
That's so stinky. Oh no. Is it eatable?
It's known as the king of the fruits. Imagine a coconut the size of your head. Now cover it in greenish-yellow spikes like a sea urchin. Crack it open to reveal the mustard-yellow flesh and expose the smell of onions, rotten eggs, and feet. That's durian.
It smells like hell. It tastes like heaven.
Raymond Young is the owner of MK Durian in Brooklyn. He sells durians to wholesalers and to customers who love the fruit but don't want to deal with the lingering smell. Durians are considered a delicacy in Malaysia and Thailand. It only grows in subtropical climates, which makes it even more valuable in the U.S. Even though the past couple of winters have been slow for durian vendors, the surplus from last summer means that they may be able to sell more of the fruit at a lower price this winter.
These past 2 years, seems like June and July have more durians than December and Jan. It's really hard to tell.
Young attributes unusually warm weather for the summer surplus. Last winter, he sold durians for $12 to $16 per pound. That's around $30 to $40 per fruit. This year, he slashed prices down to $10 per durian. For vendor Chun Fan, slashing prices is an unthinkable move, regardless of low demand.
We sell the good one, number one, so the price up very, very high.
In Malaysia, durian is traditionally eaten fresh, but because of growing international demand, farmers now blast freeze fruits immediately after picking and then store it at below freezing temperatures.
Wholesaler 批發出嚟，我們賣完了再拿。
Fan says that freezing durian is a way vendors manage unpredictable supply and avoid waste. In China, people will pay hundreds for durians. We freeze to save, he says.
After they open up, the textures, the smell, everything is gone. This is considered garbage. So between 24 hours, we have to ship to our factory to have it nitrogen procedure.
Raymond Young currently has 200 cases of durian in his freezer, which adds up to over $50,000 worth of goods. Young says he hopes to sell at least half of what he has in stock before a new shipment comes in January. His goal this winter is to simply break even.
We just want to make the customer happy. If you like it, you will love it. If you don't like it, you will hate it.
For Columbia Radio News, Shannon Lin.
New York City has a long list of prohibited pets, from rhinos and zebras to ferrets and hedgehogs. Every year, 311 receives hundreds of complaints about illegal animals being kept as pets.
Nearly half of the complaints are called in for one animal, the humble rooster. Sashi McClendon reports on how these bootlegged birds are faring in local apartment buildings.
Nestled between two apartment buildings in the Bronx sits a gated community garden. If you peer into the back of it, you can see a pigeon coop with birds hopping around inside. And if you listen hard enough, you can even hear the muffled sound of a lone rooster crow. While hens are legal to own in the city, roosters are outlawed. And according to 311, there have been 3 charges in November leveled against this rooster. The owner of the rooster, who wouldn't give his name, said that the bird had already been taken away by animal control. Yet I could still hear distinct rooster calls coming from the garden. Charlene Bonnell, who lives across the street, is well acquainted with those sounds.
When you're walking by, you don't expect to hear, arr, 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 and you do every morning, and it's so awesome. When I hear them, it's like, okay, it's time to get up. We got to get up with the roosters.
My next attempt to track down someone who owned a rooster proved more successful.
When we let him walk around, he just kind of stands in a corner preening his feathers. I'm like, dude, you're free. Walk around a little bit. Stretch your legs. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like maybe he's depressed a little bit because there's no other chickens.
That's Lily talking about her pet rooster, Galileo. Quick note, Lily asked for her last name not to be used. But 2 years ago, she and her boyfriend took Galileo back to their apartment in Brooklyn after he was left abandoned at the pet store they both worked at.
We knew it was bad because this is going to give us a lot of trouble. I mean, who the hell has a chicken in an apartment?
But Lily didn't know Galileo was a male when she first got him. It turns out that it's really difficult to sex a young chicken. On day 1, he looked like any old hen. But after a couple of months, Galileo quickly developed the signature signs of a rooster. That's when Lily knew she was in trouble.
Damn, this sucks. He's loud, he's illegal, and he doesn't give us any eggs.
It was time to find Galileo a new home. Lily says she first contacted nearby farms, then looked up rooster rehoming Facebook groups online. No luck there.
Then I tried sanctuaries, and they're just like, we can't take any more animals, but hey, try these other sanctuaries. And then you see the next day they're like, we got a new pig. And I'm like, really? You could take a rooster, we got a pig?
Lily's right. Many of the animal sanctuaries in the area are at full capacity.
Every time they call us to take a rooster, if we say no, and we say, like, try this person, or this sanctuary, a lot of times they already have, and everybody's full.
That's Susie Costin. She's the director of Farm Animal Sanctuary in Watkins Glen, New York. Right now, she's over 50 roosters from the city and just can't take any more.
God, I bet we get calls for them weekly. Most of the backyard ordinances do not allow for roosters because of the noise. So a lot of roosters get dumped in, like, city parks. They get dumped at the shelters. They get dumped all over the place.
That brings us full circle back to Lily's situation. Remember, she took in Galileo after he was dumped outside her pet store. 2 years later, his future is still bleak. Galileo can't metaphorically spread his wings in her apartment or cock-a-doodle-doo to his heart's content. Such is the life of a country boy trapped in the city. Sachi McClendon, Columbia Radio News.
Winter is here, and temperatures continue to drop, which brings up the question, what will happen to New York's feral cats?
These aren't your traditional house cats. They can't be tamed. And while they tend to prefer the outdoors, they need a little help to get through New York's brutal winters. Lisette Voyko reports.
This is Chauncey. He's probably about 15. He looks good.
That's Julia Rassman. She's a community caretaker for feral cats at a neighborhood near Brooklyn's Navy Yard. She makes sure the cats are fed and in good health.
Many of them are former house cats, or they're just extremely feeder friendly. All right, so they get wet food every day and dry food every day. They are very spoiled, right?
Even though the cats are well fed, they'll never be house cats. Kathleen O'Malley is one of the directors for the city's Feral Cat Initiative.
Cats are a special population. They're underserved. And a really important part of it is trap, neuter, return.
Trap, neuter, return, or TNR for short, is a humane way to capture feral cats and take them to a local vet to be neutered. After surgery, the cats are released back in their neighborhoods.
Because feral cats do not belong in shelters. They're not candidates for adoption. They're really difficult to tame. So it's best to spay and neuter them, get them vaccinated against rabies, put them back where they came from.
O'Malley says community caretakers are vitally important in the winter.
People realize, hey, it's really winter now, and I need to get shelters for my cats. It really saves lives.
At special workshops, participants learn the importance of neutering. One cat can have up to 12 kittens per year. In 7 years, that can turn into nearly 400 cats. Feral cats also control rodents, but lots of people don't really like the cats. Sophia Donahue attended last Saturday's TNR workshop at a Brooklyn library.
We had so many coming in that we're feeding, and I couldn't trap them, and neighbors kept poisoning them.
Feral cats will always be at risk of disease, injury, or cruelty by humans. Here's O'Malley again with the Feral Cat Initiative. She thinks our society should place a higher value on cats.
You know, the things that we cat lovers love about cats, how they're independent thinkers. A lot of people don't get that, and they're kind of annoyed by that. And you know, when people see a stray dog on the street, everybody's like, oh my God, get the dog, save the dog, please, somebody. And when they see a cat on the street, it's like, there's a cat.
Even though society as a whole doesn't love feral cats, TNR workshops are more popular than ever. The program certified over 9,000 people since it started almost a decade ago. Next year, more workshops will be offered in outer boroughs to satisfy demand. I'm Lisette Voyko for Columbia Radio News.
Our executive producer today was Bianca Jacobone. Leading our staff of reporters was senior producer Champ Barden.
Director Caroline Hopkins coordinated our studio production with Sachi McClendon and Cosette Nunez, who streamed this to the web.
Senior editor Ali Swenson wrote the show with Lizette Voitko.
Our instructors, Sally Herships and Andres Caballero, advised our staff. I'm Megan Terros.
And I'm Olivia Reingold. From all of us here at Columbia Radio News, thanks for listening.